Today I'm going to be doing something that I never expected to do on camera. I'm going to read through my official autism report publicly. There's some tough bits in here, so this might be a bit emotional at times. Some things are quite clinical and some bits are just blunt. Some parts do really hurt, but I know that there's a lot of people who want to know what an assessment actually looks like and what sort of things that they will find out about you. And it also might help anyone else who's trying to figure out whether they might too be autistic to know what experiences an autistic person might go through in their lives. So I'm sharing mine start to finish. Of course, it's a lot to remember, so I've put down some bullet points to remember what I want to say. So the assessment was referred by my GP. I'd filled out a bunch of screening questionnaires on the run up to the actual assessment. The wait at the time was 2 years long, which is actually not very long at all in the UK. I had the assessment with my mum present. Because autism is developmental, they like to have someone that's known you for as long as possible, ideally a parent. So this part of the report talks about why I was assessed. And they quote me saying, "There is something else. ADHD doesn't explain it all." So I'd already been diagnosed with ADHD at that point, but I did know that there was a lot more going on because I had always had lifelong social struggles. It also mentions about me being worried about passing things on to my kids and being able to recognise and support them so that I could be a better mum. And it goes into the early development. And I can't believe that they actually went back and asked questions to my mum about when she was pregnant with me. Anyway, some of the things that stand out in this part are about eating. So my mum said that I wouldn't tolerate warm food and I would basically only want to eat yogurt. So the only way that my mum managed to get me to eat proper food when I was very little was by giving me a spoonful of hot food and then a spoonful of yogurt, basically just tricking me. And then she went on to say that I separated food, I couldn't tolerate it touching, and I ate it in quite a regimented way. And that's still true. I still do that now. It's still texture over taste, always. My mum also said that I lost interest in toys quickly. I tried to eat Play-Doh and soil, and I couldn't cope with playgroup. And my mum thought that was because of the sound, because it was a very loud and echoey room. And she put me in another nursery later that was a lot quieter, and I did really well there. Apparently, when I was a bit older, I would play, like doing play pretend with tea parties, but only with my sister and only when I was in charge. My sister was 4 years younger than me. So then it goes into education, like school. And this is where, for me, I find it quite tough. So it mentions about how I felt different from an early age. When I was very little, I thought that was because of my condition called MCAD deficiency. I have a metabolic condition, and this metabolic condition is very rare. So I always presumed that I felt different because I was different because I had this metabolic condition. But it wouldn't have made me feel different in the ways that I was feeling different. Mentions about my social abilities then, I didn't really get too involved with peers. I tried to, but I struggled. So I would be gravitating more towards people who were much younger or older than me, or even adults. And I did struggle with friendships. So I would have like a friend that I'd be friends with for a period of time, and then it would just like I remember myself as a child, then that person would just stop liking me and I would never understand why. And it was just this pattern, and that pattern continued for a long time. My sister, as I've mentioned, is 4 years younger than me. And at one point, she actually told my mom and me that friends were making fun of me, but I couldn't tell. And that was like really upsetting. My sister basically just said that I couldn't see it, which is heartbreaking, really. I knew that I was being bullied. I felt excluded. I felt left out. But knowing that some people that I thought were friends were picking on me and I hadn't noticed is really hard to take. When I was in primary school, there was an instance where my teacher actually hit me. My mum took me out of that school. I was autistic. I was struggling in the classroom. It was noisy. I couldn't concentrate. But the teacher hit me because she thought that I wasn't listening. She thought that I wasn't paying attention. I couldn't listen and I couldn't pay attention. I've quoted in the assessment that high school was the worst time of my life. And honestly, I would still say the same thing now. It was an absolutely awful time in my life. And I know a lot of people don't like high school for different reasons. I know there are a lot of people that get picked on But it was relentless. And it was only like the last couple of years of school that I had some friends. And what's really sad is that the first time I was invited around to this group of friends to spend time with this group of friends, I had accepted that I was going to be attacked. I wasn't. They actually turned out to be really nice people, but that was how I felt. So 13, 14-year-old me thought that I was going to a sleepover to be attacked, and I'd accepted it. That's hard. In high school, my best friends up until that point were the school librarian and some friends I'd met in the special educational needs area, and they were great friends, and I still wonder where they're at now because I didn't keep in touch with them. But yeah, it's just a shame that I felt that I couldn't mix with everyone else. And in hindsight, I'm thinking back and I'm thinking, why were the SEN kids not mixed with everyone else? These are SEN kids in mainstream school. They weren't flight risks, but why were they kept in that room on break? I hadn't even thought about that till now. So this part does need a little bit of a trigger warning. I will insert some text on here for how far you need to skip forward if you want to avoid this. I'm talking about things that I wouldn't even say in front of my mum in the assessment, and seeing it written down is actually quite a lot. So I mentioned that I was vulnerable to sexual assault at school and out of school, and these are things that I've sort of wiped out. When I was very young, like in high school still, I was still a virgin. I didn't lose my virginity until I was much older, and that was consensual. But there was instances of things that happened that I look back and see were not fully consensual. And I wasn't like getting upset over them things at that point, but they made me feel wrong and funny. It wasn't with adults, it was people my age, but I was taken advantage of. And then a bit later on, when I got a little bit older, there was another instance I'm not going to go into detail with because I'm not ready to. Maybe I will be one day, but I'm not ready to. And this instance was when I was with people that I considered friends. And at the time, and for years, I wouldn't have even considered it to be any sort of assault, but I would now. I look back and the way that it happened wasn't right. And that was because I was vulnerable. That was because I thought that being involved in that would have meant that people liked me more. That was why I didn't try and leave or anything. So, yeah, that took a long time to even process. Like I say, I didn't even realize I'd been taken advantage of until a few years ago, until I sort of was thinking through all of this and put it on this. I never reported it. I don't have any interest in doing that. But sorry, gone off on a bit of a tangent there, but that was hard. Someone tried to blackmail me when I was in college. I was speaking to random people on messaging sites, and this particular messaging application will say I'd met this person on there and we were just chatting. I just chatted to anyone because I was lonely. I was a really lonely kid, so I'd speak to anyone that wanted to speak to me. And I did. I had a couple of friends outside of college and school at this point, and I'd said something jokey that I didn't think was that bad to this person about one of my other friends, and I don't know how. I don't know if I'd given them the full information of this friend. I reported it to my college, but they blackmailed me and said that they wanted me to send pictures of myself to them, and if I didn't, then they were going to send a screenshot of what I'd said to my friend. And at this point, this friend was someone that I probably had a little bit of a crush on them actually. And this person said also that if I didn't, then they would be waiting for me outside of college. They knew where I went to college, and I knew that they didn't live far from there. And that was why I spoke to college, because I felt threatened effectively. I just feel thankful that I was able to have the courage to go and tell someone at college. But I don't think I've actually told anyone else that before because that's a bit embarrassing. They got to that point. I'm just thankful that I did notice then. So yeah, like autistic girls like me, especially ones that mask really well, we are incredibly vulnerable to things like that. We can very easily be fooled. Yeah, let's carry on. Okay, so now this is moving on to adulthood. Let's talk about meltdowns. I didn't experience many meltdowns when I was very young. In fact, I would say as a child, I didn't experience any. I was probably the opposite way. So, one thing with autism is it can be very much opposites, extreme reactions or underreactions to things. When my granddad died when I was very little, I didn't have any emotions. The only emotion that I had was when I told my class at school, I smiled as I said it. And I was devastated about that, and it really affected me. And it was only a few years after that I started unraveling all of that. I didn't know what emotions I was feeling. I just subdued them. When I got to high school, I very much started to just leave. I would just leave places abruptly and walk off. Very often I would walk off into the local forest, or I'd walk off up the lanes in the countryside. And now I can recognize that was just getting away from all of the sounds, because that was peaceful and that was relaxing. Even now I'm thinking, like, that sounds so nice to just walk off and just be on my own, completely on my own. So I described my meltdowns in the assessment as screaming, hitting myself, throwing things, pacing, covering my ears, lying on the floor, and then completely shutting down. I mentioned as well that I usually feel shame and remorse, but at the time I don't feel I have any control. And I don't think that I'm alone in feeling like that. I know what's happening. I know that I'm overloaded. I know that I'm having a meltdown, but there's no way of me being able to stop that and slow it down. And I get, the more that I try and stop it, the more frustrated I get with myself, because I'm like, why is my brain doing this? Why is this happening? And very painful. It's very mentally painful. And it's happened more and more as I have gotten older. The more that my life demands have increased, the harder I have had meltdowns. When it's, I think also I have to hold it in for longer. So quite often when my husband has been working for a few days in a row and I've been on my own with the children, obviously it's not safe to have a meltdown when I'm with the kids. And this might make it sound like I can control it. I know that there's going to be autistic people out there that are going to understand this, some autistic people anyway. It's like my brain does hold it in until it gets to this point where there's no, like, there, it's like my brain almost relaxes to let it all out. So it will often be when my husband has come off those back-to-back shifts that it will happen, and it's horrible. Before I knew what they were, I used to call them crazy person episodes. And for a long time, because I was so embarrassed about my behavior, I would get in the car and drive off, and that was dangerous. There was times when I ended up being admitted to A&E because I would go and overdose. And that sounds really backwards, and that sounds very confusing to a lot of people. But the reason for that would be that I just wanted to be almost shut down. I wanted all my head and all my feelings to just disappear. The only way to do that is to not be. So in them moments when it would be so intense, I would not want to be anymore. I look back and I was not actually suicidal, but I would not want to be in those moments. And usually I would overdose and then panic afterwards. Like, I would come out of the meltdown eventually and then realize, what have I done? I need to go and get myself sorted out. So then I would end up in A&E, and that would end up being it's not a very pleasant experience going to A&E for an overdose. Most of the staff don't understand. There was a few understanding staff at my local A&E that were very supportive, but most of them don't understand. They think that you're there trying to get attention, and in some ways I really wanted somebody to help me stop all of this. But yeah, it's really sad the way that it's perceived. But anyway, that hasn't happened for several years now. Hasn't happened for quite a while. A long time, actually. Right, this is turning out to be very long. The next part is about the diagnostic criteria. So there are 3 parts to the diagnostic criteria for autism: social communication, order and routine, and sensory differences. So I'll go through very briefly how they decided that I was autistic. Obviously there was all the other bits that we've spoken about, and this is tying everything to the official criteria. So the first section is about social communication. So they said that I have deficits in emotional reciprocity. I don't like the word deficits. Sorry, I have differences. So I have differences in emotional reciprocity. So I struggle to know how to respond when someone's upset. Now, I've actually sort of trained myself to be able to understand better. I've done a counselling course and 2 other courses that were linked to active listening, and I have actually been able to learn that, but it does take a lot out of me, and I have to go into that mode. So it's not something that I can just do very easily, and if I'm overwhelmed or close to burnout, it's very hard to do that for me. In the past, I would tell a story about myself that was similar to them, instead of like validating what they were feeling. So I just completely miss those emotional cues. They also said that I had deficits in non-verbal behavior. Again, I'm going to say differences. It's not deficits. So they noticed that when I was feeling uncomfortable, I would just avoid eye contact. They said that I would look at them very briefly, and then if they looked at me, I'd just look away. They noticed that I mimicked facial expressions, and I had mentioned in my assessment about practicing facial expressions in the mirror when I was much younger. It mentions how I struggle with having conversations that aren't linked to something that I'm interested in, and I really struggle with small talk, which is super common in autistic people. I can do small talk if I have to, but it doesn't mean that it's easy for me, and it doesn't mean that I find that I like doing it. I hate it. I don't see the point in it. What's the point in small talk? Just have a proper conversation with me. My mum also said that I can come across as quite self-centered in that sense. I'm aware of that. I'm trying to work on it. I think I've worked on it. I think I'm better than I used to be. I hope. They also mentioned that I overshared with new people. Still do that sometimes. My mum also said that I have a tendency to go on and on about things, and that I get extremely agitated if I get interrupted and will start what I was saying again. They also noticed that in the assessment that I either gave far too much information on something or not enough at all. The next part is talking about repetitive behaviours and sensory issues. As a child, I like to rock very sort of subtly because I picked up very early that not everyone else was doing that. And I remember feeling like I was very much the odd one out. I like to tap things, I like to click on pen lids. I mentioned that when I was younger, I didn't know what to do with my arms. I would often just feel like I didn't know what they were meant to be doing. So I would just sort of swing them a little bit. But again, I was very conscious that other people weren't doing that. So I tried my hardest not to. I've always had restless legs, and I still do now. I am trying to unmask, as they call it, and it's one of the first things that I do. So like I've started allowing myself to play with my hands and play with like, you know, move around if I need to when I'm doing stuff. God, I'm bloody doing it now. There's loads more to this, and I'm trying my best not to overload everyone. They spoke about how I would have like little routines, so it wouldn't be like a really strict regime every day, but I would have like strange things about the way that I would eat food, and like, you know, eating similar sort of mouthfuls on each side, the way that I would walk through doors. I don't do it anymore, but as a child, I had to do it. Everything had to be equal, basically. They spoke about the like hyperfixation, so the special interest that I had, that I would become very fully immersed in an interest at a time. That still remains. It's hard to break away from that, and it can affect a lot of other things. I'm definitely going to do a video on that at some point. We also spoke about sorting things. So when I had beads or like Scooby strings, pens, anything like that, what I would find the most exciting about it, which was different to other kids, would be sorting it. So beads, I wasn't excited about making the bracelets. I was excited about making a pattern or tipping them all out onto my bed, mixing them all up, and then spending hours sorting them. I also love sorting my parents' coins out. That was what I enjoyed. That was what I considered to be play at that age. And then also about, I would lose track of movies because I would notice things like misspelled words or inconsistent details, and I wouldn't then be able to focus on the plot. I would notice those things and it would completely take me away from the movie, and it still would do now. My husband gets very annoyed with certain programs if I watch them and they're linked to my job role, and I'll go, that's wrong, they don't do that, that's wrong. So yeah. And then on the sensory side, they've mentioned about how I find like lots and lots of different sounds altogether very overwhelming. When I was younger, I've already mentioned that I preferred like forest spaces over public spaces, and then that I don't like unexpected touch. So I'm fine with hugs and things, but only if I'm expecting them. If I'm not, it makes me feel very just uncomfortable. I feel like there's something that's been missed here. So social communication, that's repetitive behaviours and sensory issues all in one. There's also a part about how I would think in terms of black and white thinking, and I wouldn't be able to understand people's perspectives. Now, I say that since I've been diagnosed, that I actually make a conscious effort to understand other people's point of views, and I think I'm better at that now than neurotypical people. But for a long time, it was very black and white. I do still struggle with some black and white thinking, though, when it comes to like rules on the road. I've struggled with that, and rules in the workplace and things like that. I don't understand when people don't stick to them. If there's a way that I've been shown to do something, that's the way that I need to do it, and it's really, that can be quite tough at times. I've had meltdowns in the car because of people not listening to rules on the road. I do pull over if I have a bad meltdown, so don't worry. Anyway, that was a lot. I'm going to be doing a lot more videos on my own experiences, so that's not everything. There's so much more to talk about, but for now we're going to leave it at that because that's a lot of information in one video. This whole thing ends with the diagnostic opinion, and they say, it is our opinion that Jessica does meet the formal diagnostic criteria for an autism spectrum disorder. So, yeah, after all of that, all the childhood struggles, the friendships that I struggled with, the meltdowns, the sensory overload, the vulnerability, it wasn't just me. It wasn't me just being weird or broken. I was autistic. I've always been autistic, and I still am autistic, and I always will be. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. If you're reading your own report right now, or you're waiting for one, or you're waiting for your assessment, I really hope that this has helped you feel a little bit less alone. Do drop a comment if any of this has resonated with you. If you want a part two, if you want me to deep delve into anything that I've mentioned today, or like how I felt post-diagnosis, let me know. And as I always say, this is probably going to be my ending, you know. I don't know how to end these videos. So I guess I'll just see you next time. Bye bye.